The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction. Thousands of alien beings filled the seats, their voices creating a low hum that echoed off the crystal walls. Representatives from hundreds of worlds sat in careful groups, each species keeping to their own section. The air smelled of different atmospheres, mixing together through the life support systems. At the center of it all stood Emperor Zixal. His body was made of living crystal that caught the light and threw it back in sharp, angry flashes. He was tall, much taller than any human, and his presence filled the room with fear. When he moved, the crystal made soft ringing sounds that somehow felt threatening. The Emperor raised one crystalline arm, and the huge room fell silent. Even the air recycling system seemed to quiet down. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Rumors had been spreading through the galaxy for weeks that something big was coming. Fellow beings of the Galactic Council. The Emperor's voice boomed through hidden speakers. His words carried the weight of absolute authority. Today we face a crisis that threatens our very way of life. In the human section, a much smaller area near the back, Ambassador Sarah Chen sat alone. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and glasses that she constantly adjusted. Her simple blue suit looked plain compared to the elaborate outfits worn by other species. She appeared to be paying attention, but her fingers drummed quietly on her briefcase. For too long, the Emperor continued, we have allowed a plague to spread through our galaxy. A species so violent, so destructive, that they cannot be allowed to continue existing. These creatures call themselves humans. A ripple of nervous sounds went through the crowd. Some aliens chittered. Others made low growling noises. And a few released chemical signals that the air systems quickly filtered out. Everyone knew humans were considered dangerous, but nobody expected this. Humans have shown themselves to be warlike beyond reason, Emperor Zixal declared. His crystal body glowed brighter with each word. They fight among themselves constantly. They destroy their own planet. They show no respect for the natural order of things. They are a cancer that must be cut out before it spreads further. Ambassador Chen shifted in her seat but said nothing. She reached down and touched her briefcase, checking that it was still securely closed. Therefore, the Emperor's voice rose to shake the very walls. The Hegemony Empire formally declares war upon the human species. We will cleanse them from the galaxy once and for all. Their worlds will be sterilized, their ships will be destroyed, their very memory will be erased from galactic history. The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room turned toward the small human section. This was the moment when the human representative should stand up, beg for mercy, or at least try to negotiate. This was when she should explain why humanity deserved to live. Instead, Ambassador Chen did something nobody expected. She laughed. It was not the bitter laugh of someone facing death. It was not the desperate laugh of someone who had lost their mind. It was the kind of laugh someone makes when they hear a really good joke. It bubbled up from her chest and filled the air around her seat. She even wiped a tear from her eye. The Emperor's crystal form darkened with rage. You dare mock this declaration? You find your species' destruction amusing? But Ambassador Chen was not paying attention to him anymore. She had opened her briefcase and pulled out what looked like a folded piece of paper. As she unfolded it, the rustling sound carried clearly through the silent hall. It was a newspaper. An actual paper newspaper, printed on real paper with black ink. She adjusted her glasses and began to read, completely ignoring the thousands of staring eyes around her. She even turned the page once, the crisp sound echoing through the chamber. Explain yourself, the Emperor roared, his crystal body now pulsed with angry red light. The Empire has just declared war on your pathetic species, and you read the news? Ambassador Chen looked up from her paper with mild interest, like someone who had just been interrupted while reading at breakfast. Oh, sorry about that. Were you saying something? I was just catching up on current events. She gestured with the newspaper. Did you mention something about a war? That's really quite adorable. The word adorable hit the Emperor like a physical blow. Never in his long life had anyone called the mighty Hegemony Empire adorable. The crystal of his body rang like broken bells. Adorable? He managed to say. Mm-hmm. Ambassador Chen nodded and went back to reading. She appeared to be looking at a section with pictures and simple drawings. Her lips curved into a small smile at something she found amusing. Around the hall, other species began to whisper among themselves. This was not how these things usually went. When the Empire declared war, people trembled. They begged. They offered tribute. They did not read newspapers and call the Empire adorable. The Keth Moran delegation, known for their military expertise, leaned forward in their seats. Their leader, a scarred veteran of many campaigns, studied the human with professional interest. Either this woman had completely lost her mind, or humanity knew something the rest of the galaxy did not. The peaceful Zilani huddled together in their section, their flower-like heads turning toward each other as they communicated through scent. They were already calculating which side they should support if war actually broke out. Even the mechanical Forgeborn, who rarely showed emotion through their artificial bodies, seemed confused. Their optical sensors focused on the human woman, trying to understand her behavior. Emperor Zixtal gathered himself for another attempt. Human, you will explain your insulting behavior immediately, or we will consider it an act of war in itself. Ambassador Chen glanced up again, this time looking slightly annoyed at being interrupted. Look, I'm trying to read here. If you want to chat about something, maybe make an appointment with my assistant. She pointed to a small communication device on her belt. I'm sure she can find some time next week. Then she went back to her newspaper, turning to what appeared to be the sports section. The Emperor stood frozen, his crystal form flickering between different colors as his emotions shifted rapidly between rage, confusion, and something that might have been fear. In all his years of conquest, nothing like this had ever happened. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had become the stage for something unprecedented. War had been declared, but somehow the victim was reading the funny pages instead of surrendering. Emperor Zixtal's crystal form blazed with white-hot fury. The light from his body was so bright that several alien species had to shield their eyes or activate protective filters. The temperature in the Great Hall rose noticeably as his rage built up like a star going supernova. Enough, his voice boomed through the chamber, causing small pieces of debris to fall from the ceiling. This insult cannot stand. Admiral Keth Moore, initiate Operation Cleansing Fire immediately. From the military section, a tall figure rose. Admiral Keth Moore was a hegemony officer who had never lost a battle. His pale blue skin was covered with scars from a dozen campaigns, and his 4 arms moved with precise military efficiency. When he spoke, his voice carried the confidence of someone who had destroyed entire worlds. Yes, Emperor. How many ships shall we deploy for this? Cleansing? Emperor Zixtal's form pulsed with satisfied energy. All of them. Every ship in the Imperial Navy. I want 10,000 vessels converging on the human home system. I want their pathetic worlds to see death approaching from every direction. A gasp went through the assembled aliens. 10,000 ships was the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history. It was enough firepower to crack planets and turn entire solar systems into dust. The Empire had used such force only once before, against the rebel worlds of the Outer Rim, and those planets were still radioactive wastelands centuries later. Ambassador Chen looked up from her newspaper with mild interest. 10,000? My, that does seem like overkill for 12 little human colonies. Are you sure you can spare that many ships? I'd hate for you to leave your borders undefended. The casual way she mentioned their exact number of colonies sent a chill through the Imperial intelligence officers present. Those numbers were supposed to be classified. Admiral Keth Moore's scarred face showed a flicker of uncertainty. Emperor, perhaps we should reconsider the scale of this operation. Our intelligence reports suggest that humanity poses minimal threat. Their entire fleet consists of perhaps 300 vessels, most of which appear to be converted cargo ships. 312, actually, Ambassador Chen said without looking up from her paper. Though I suppose that depends on whether you count the research ships. Some of them have really impressive sensor arrays. The precision of her knowledge made Admiral Kethmore pause. How could she know their intelligence reports better than they did? Emperor Zeextal was beyond caring about such details. I do not care if they have 3 ships or 3,000. They have insulted the Empire, and they will pay the ultimate price. Begin mobilization immediately. Admiral Kethmore bowed stiffly and activated his communication device. Within minutes, orders were flying through hyperspace to every Imperial base and shipyard. The largest war machine in galactic history began to rumble to life. Meanwhile, the other species in the council chamber were having frantic discussions. The Kethmoran military advisors were analyzing human capabilities based on publicly available information. The Zilani were broadcasting chemical signals of extreme anxiety. The Forgeborn were calculating probability matrices for various outcomes. "This is madness," whispered Ambassador Veltar of the Altarian Confederacy to his aide. "The humans have done nothing to deserve this." "Perhaps," his aide replied. "But look at their representative. Either she has completely lost her sanity, or humanity knows something we do not." Ambassador Chen seemed to be reading the entertainment section now. She chuckled softly at something, then folded the paper to see a different page. The sound of rustling paper in the tense silence was almost absurd. Back on Imperial command ships throughout the galaxy, fleet commanders were receiving their orders with growing confusion. The deployment they were being asked to execute was massive beyond anything they had ever attempted. Moving 10,000 ships would take careful coordination and enormous resources. Captain Thisala, of the Imperial dreadnought Inevitable Victory, was one of the first to voice concerns. "Command. This is Captain Thisala, requesting confirmation of fleet size for Operation Cleansing Fire." "Did you say 10,000 ships?" "Confirmed, Captain," came the reply from Imperial Command. "All available vessels are to converge on the human home system, designated Sol. This is a complete extermination order." "Understood, Command. But why? Our intelligence reports show minimal human military capability. Surely a single battle group would be sufficient?" There was a long pause before the reply came. "Orders come directly from the Emperor. No further explanation required." Similar conversations were happening across the Imperial fleet. Experienced commanders who had fought in dozens of campaigns could not understand why such overwhelming force was being deployed against such a small target. On the research ship Analytical Mind, Imperial Intelligence Officer Zorkon was reviewing every piece of data they had about humanity. The more he studied, the more confused he became. The humans controlled exactly 12 star systems, just as their ambassador had said. Their technology appeared to be several generations behind Imperial standards. Their largest ships were smaller than Imperial destroyers. They had no known superweapons, no special defenses, no secret alliances. Most puzzling of all, they were not behaving like a species under threat of extinction. Imperial spy satellites were reporting that human colonies were continuing their normal activities. Farmers were tending crops, factories were producing consumer goods, children were going to school. There was no mass evacuation, no emergency military mobilization, no signs of panic whatsoever. "It makes no sense," Zorkon muttered to his assistant. "Either they are all insane, or they know something we do not." His assistant, a young intelligence officer named Kyleth, pulled up another report. "Sir, there's something else strange. Our monitoring stations picked up increased activity from human research facilities, but not military research. They seem to be working on theoretical physics projects." "Physics?" Zorkon frowned. "What kind of physics?" "According to our analysis, something related to temporal mechanics." "But that's impossible, sir. Nobody has ever figured out how to manipulate time in any practical way." Back in the council chamber, Ambassador Chen was now reading what appeared to be the business section of her newspaper. She made small sounds at certain articles, sometimes nodding in approval. Emperor Zixtal had calmed down enough to think strategically. "Human, I will give you one final chance to explain your behavior. Your species faces complete annihilation, yet you act as if nothing has happened. Are you hoping to negotiate? Do you wish to surrender?" Ambassador Chen looked up and adjusted her glasses. Negotiate? Oh, there's no need for that. Everything has already been worked out. She gestured with her newspaper. It's all right here in black and white. What do you mean? The Emperor demanded. Well, Chen said, settling back in her chair comfortably. You might want to check the date on your intelligence reports. I have a feeling they might be a little behind the times. She smiled and returned to her reading, leaving the Emperor and the entire Galactic Council to wonder what that could possibly mean. The massive Imperial fleet began moving toward human space like a storm of death approaching a peaceful shore. Ships from every corner of the Empire left their stations and jumped into hyperspace. The coordination was impressive, even by Imperial standards. 10,000 vessels, each one capable of destroying cities, all heading toward 12 small human colonies. In the council chamber, Ambassador Chen finally closed her newspaper and stood up. The simple action somehow commanded attention more effectively than the Emperor's dramatic displays of power. She walked slowly to the center speaking area, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. I suppose I should explain what's been happening, she said, adjusting her glasses. Her voice was calm and clear, reaching every corner of the vast hall without any electronic amplification. Emperor Zixtal leaned forward, his crystal form flickering with anticipation. Finally. You will beg for your species' survival. Oh no. Chen shook her head with a gentle smile. I was just thinking it might be polite to explain why I was reading during your speech. You see, I wasn't being rude. I was actually doing research. She held up the newspaper. In the bright lights of the council chamber, aliens with good eyesight could see that it looked perfectly ordinary. Black text on white paper, with pictures and headlines just like newspapers everywhere. This is yesterday's paper, Chen continued. Well, yesterday, from my perspective. From your perspective, it's tomorrow's paper. Specifically, it's tomorrow's edition of the Solar Times, published on Luna. A confused murmur went through the crowd. Several aliens activated translation devices, thinking they had misheard. The Forgeborn ran quick calculations and found errors in their logic circuits. Admiral Keth Moore spoke up from his section. That is impossible. You cannot have a newspaper from the future. Under normal circumstances, you'd be absolutely right, Chen agreed. But these aren't normal circumstances. You see, about 18 months ago, human scientists made a breakthrough in temporal mechanics. Not time travel, mind you. That's still impossible as far as we know. But time manipulation? That turned out to be surprisingly practical. She opened the newspaper and showed the front page to the assembly. Even from a distance they could make out the large headline. It read, Galactic War ends in single day. Temporal manipulation, Chen explained, allows us to speed up or slow down time in specific areas. It's quite useful for research. When you can make a laboratory experience time at 1,000 times normal speed, you can compress decades of work into a few hours. The Emperor's crystal form was starting to dim as confusion replaced anger. You are claiming that humans have mastered time itself? Not mastered, Chen corrected. That would be presumptuous. We've just learned how to adjust its flow rate in localized fields. It's actually not that complicated once you understand the underlying physics. The hard part was building the equipment. She turned to another page of the newspaper. For example, while you've been mobilizing your fleet this morning, our research teams have been working in accelerated time fields. From their perspective, they've had several decades to prepare for this war. From our perspective, it's been about 3 hours. Admiral Keth Moore's scarred face had gone pale. What kind of preparations? Oh, the usual things, Chen said casually. New ship designs, improved weapons, better defenses. Though I have to say, most of our effort went into defensive systems. We really don't like fighting. She flipped to what appeared to be the business section. Here's an interesting article. Temporal Industries stock soars as military division announces successful field tests. The stock market is very excited about our new temporal defense systems. The Kethmoran military experts were frantically trying to calculate the implications. If humans could accelerate their research and development by factors of hundreds or thousands, then any technological advantage the Empire had would disappear within hours. "You're bluffing," Emperor Zixtal declared, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "No species has ever achieved practical temporal manipulation." Chen nodded sympathetically. "I understand your skepticism. That's why I brought proof." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out another newspaper. This one had a different date and different headlines. "This is today's paper," she explained. "The one I was reading during your declaration. Note the date. December 7th, 2000. 157. Now look at the paper I'm holding now." She showed them both papers side by side. "This one is dated December 8th, 2000. 157. Tomorrow's paper." She opened tomorrow's paper and began reading headlines aloud. "Empire surrenders unconditionally. Admiral Kethmore requests political asylum. Emperor Zixtal abdicates throne." She paused and looked directly at the Emperor. "Oh, and there's a nice article about how you're planning to retire to a monastery on the peaceful world of Serenity Prime." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. "There's also a lovely piece about a local cat who won first prize at the county fair for growing the largest pumpkin," Chen continued. Apparently it was a slow news day otherwise. She folded both newspapers and put them away. "The thing is, once you can manipulate time, every other technology becomes trivial to develop. Need better materials? Accelerate your research lab and develop them in what appears to be minutes. Need more advanced computers? Speed up your design teams. Need weapons that can penetrate any known defense? Give your weapons researchers subjective centuries to work on the problem." The implications hit the assembled aliens like a physical wave. A species with practical time manipulation could advance their technology at impossible rates. They could prepare for any threat with unlimited time to develop countermeasures. But, Chen raised a finger. "Here's the interesting part. Do you know what our newspapers are full of? Not conquest plans or imperial ambitions. They're full of scientific discoveries, cultural achievements, and yes, local cat shows. Because when you have unlimited time to solve problems, you stop worrying about resources and territory and start focusing on actually important things." She walked closer to the Emperor. "Your intelligence reports were correct about our military capabilities. Right up until this morning, humanity really did have only 312 ships, mostly converted cargo vessels. But since then, we've had subjective decades to prepare." Emperor Zixtal's crystal form was now barely glowing. "How many ships do you have now?" Chen consulted tomorrow's newspaper. "According to this, it doesn't matter. The war ends when your fleet encounters a single human vessel called the Temporal Advantage. Just one ship. It turns out that when you can manipulate time around your enemies, you don't need very many ships to win a war." She looked around the chamber at all the frightened alien faces. "The good news is that, according to tomorrow's paper, we win this war without firing a single shot. Nobody dies. No planets get destroyed. Your empire dissolves peacefully, and everyone gets to go home to their families." The Emperor managed to find his voice. "What do you want from us?" Chen smiled and started walking back to her seat. "Nothing, really. We just want to be left alone to pursue our research in peace. Oh, and we'd like the galaxy to be a bit more peaceful in general. It's hard to focus on important scientific questions when people keep declaring wars all over the place." She sat down and opened today's newspaper again. "But don't worry about the details. According to tomorrow's paper, you'll figure it all out. Apparently you're quite reasonable once you get past all the rage and crystal flashing." The Great Hall of the Galactic Council had become the site of the strangest war declaration in history. The Empire had threatened humanity with extinction, and humanity had responded by reading the newspaper account of their own victory. Tomorrow's newspaper. The Imperial fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a plague of metal locusts. 10,000 ships of every size and type spread across space in a formation that could be seen from the outer planets. Massive dreadnoughts hung alongside sleek destroyers and bristling cruisers. It was the largest concentration of military power the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral Kethmore stood on the bridge of his flagship, the inevitable Victory, and watched the tactical displays fill with data. The human home system looked exactly as their intelligence reports had described it. A small yellow star with several rocky planets, a few gas giants, and scattered space stations. Nothing that looked like serious military fortifications. "Admiral," reported his tactical officer, "we're detecting minimal human fleet presence. A few orbital defense platforms around the third planet. Some patrol craft near the asteroid belt. Total count is less than 50 vessels, and most appear to be civilian transports." Admiral Kethmore frowned at the displays. After Ambassador Chen's claims about temporal technology, he had expected to find a massive fleet waiting for them. Instead, the system looked almost defenseless. "Sir," another officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from Human Command. They're requesting permission to approach under a flag of truce." "Permission granted," the Admiral replied. Maybe the humans had come to their senses and were ready to surrender. That would save everyone a lot of trouble. But as the minutes passed, something strange became clear on the sensors. Only one ship was approaching. Not a fleet. Not a squadron. Just a single vessel. "Tactical, confirm that reading," Admiral Kethmore ordered. "Confirmed, sir. One ship, approaching on a direct course. It's small, sir. About destroyer class. Maybe a bit smaller." The Admiral stared at the tactical display. Either the humans had completely lost their minds, or this was some kind of trap. "Identification? Broadcasting as the HSS Temporal Advantage, sir." "Human registration codes check out." Admiral Kethmore felt a chill run down his spine. Ambassador Chen had mentioned that name specifically. According to her newspaper from the future, this one ship would somehow end the war. "All ships, maintain formation but power weapons," he ordered. "If this is some kind of new weapon, I want us ready to respond." The human ship continued its steady approach. It was not moving particularly fast. Not broadcasting any threatening signals. Not launching any weapons. It looked like a completely ordinary vessel that just happened to be flying directly toward the largest war fleet in galactic history. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "the human vessel is broadcasting on all frequencies. Put it through." A calm female voice filled the bridge. "Attention, Imperial Fleet. This is Captain Rodriguez of the Temporal Advantage. Please prepare to receive our terms for your surrender." The bridge crew exchanged glances. Admiral Kethmore activated the reply channel. "Human vessel, you are outnumbered 10,000 to 1. Perhaps you should reconsider who should be surrendering to whom." "Admiral," Captain Rodriguez replied politely, "I appreciate your position. But I'm afraid math doesn't work the way you think it does when temporal fields are involved. Please stand by for demonstration." That was when the impossible began to happen. The human ship, which had been moving at normal speed, suddenly seemed to blur. It accelerated to velocities that should have been impossible for any conventional drive system. But more disturbing than its speed was what happened to everything else. "Admiral," the tactical officer shouted. His voice strangely stretched and distorted. "Something's wrong with our weapons systems. They're firing in slow motion." Admiral Kethmore looked at the main display and felt reality tilt around him. Their ship's particle beams were crawling through space like streams of honey. The energy bolts that should have crossed the distance to their target in milliseconds were moving so slowly that he could actually track them with his eyes. "What's happening to us?" he demanded. But even his own voice sounded wrong, like a recording played at the wrong speed. The human ship danced between their attacks like a fish swimming through thick syrup. It moved in ways that defied physics, accelerating and turning with impossible grace while their weapons moved like ancient projectiles fired from primitive cannons. "Temporal field established." Captain Rodriguez's voice came clearly through their communications, unaffected by whatever was happening to them. "Your fleet is now experiencing time at 1/10,000th normal rate. From your perspective, this engagement will last approximately 60 years. From ours, it's already over." Admiral Kethmore tried to give orders to his fleet, but the words came out of his mouth like thick liquid. His officers were moving as if trapped in amber. Even his thoughts seemed sluggish and strange. Through the bridge windows, he could see other ships in the fleet firing their weapons. The energy beams crawled through space at walking speed, while the human ship moved between them like a dancer avoiding raindrops. It was not even trying to fight back. It didn't need to. Admiral Kethmore, Captain Rodriguez's voice continued. I know this is disorienting, but please don't panic. You're not in any physical danger. We've simply established a temporal differential between our ship and your fleet. Time is passing normally for us, while you're experiencing it at a much slower rate. The Admiral tried to activate his emergency systems, but his hands moved like they were pushing through thick mud. Every action took enormous effort and achieved almost nothing. This is how temporal warfare works, the human captain explained patiently. We don't need to destroy your ships or kill your crews. We just need to put you in a time bubble where you can't effectively fight back. From our perspective, this battle is essentially frozen. Through his ship's sensors, which were still functioning but reporting data at an impossibly slow rate, Admiral Kethmore could see what was happening to his fleet. Every ship was trapped in the same temporal field. Their crews were moving in ultra-slow motion, their weapons firing at speeds that made them completely useless, their engines straining against time itself. The field is stable and will maintain itself indefinitely, Captain Rodriguez continued. However, we'd prefer not to leave you trapped forever. That would be cruel and contrary to human values. So here's our proposal for ending this situation. The human ship came to a stop relative to the Admiral's flagship, close enough that he could see its hull through the bridge windows. It looked completely ordinary, like any other military vessel. There were no obvious weapon systems, no exotic energy signatures, nothing that would suggest the incredible power it had just demonstrated. Emperor Zyxtal will dissolve the Hegemony Empire and allow all member species to govern themselves freely. All Imperial military forces will stand down and return to their home systems. A new Galactic Council will be established based on cooperation rather than conquest. In return, we'll release the temporal field and everyone can go home to their families. Admiral Kethmore wanted to rage, to fight, to find some way to turn the situation around. But he was trapped not just by the temporal field, but by the simple reality of the situation. The humans had not attacked them, had not threatened them, had not even fired a weapon. They had simply made it impossible for the Imperial fleet to function as a military force. I know this is difficult to accept, Captain Rodriguez said, her voice gentle and understanding. You've spent your entire career believing that bigger fleets and more powerful weapons determine the outcome of conflicts. But when one side can manipulate time itself, traditional military thinking becomes obsolete. Through the painfully slow communication systems, Admiral Kethmore managed to compose a message. It took what felt like hours for him to type out the words, though he knew that only seconds were passing in normal time. What happens if we refuse? He finally managed to transmit. Then you'll have a very long time to think it over, Captain Rodriguez replied. About 60 years from your perspective, or until you change your minds. We'll check back periodically to see if you'd like to reconsider. There's no pressure, Admiral. We're very patient people. The Admiral looked around his bridge at his officers, all frozen in the middle of their actions like statues. He thought about his crew, trapped in this temporal prison through no fault of their own. He thought about the 10,000 ships under his command, all filled with people who just wanted to return to their homes. And he thought about how a species that could manipulate time itself had chosen not to destroy their enemies, but simply to make fighting impossible. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Kethmore began to understand that sometimes the strongest position was not to fight at all. Back in the council chamber, the news of the Imperial fleet's situation spread quickly through the gathered representatives. Emergency communications from the Sol system painted a picture that nobody could have imagined. The Empire's mighty armada was trapped in a bubble of slow time, helpless and defeated without a single shot being fired in anger. Emperor Zyxtal's crystal form had lost most of its light. He stood in the center of the hall like a dimming star, his authority cracking along with his confidence. The other species watched him with a mixture of pity and calculation. Power in the galaxy was shifting, and everyone could feel it. Ambassador Chen remained in her seat, still reading her newspaper. She had moved on to what appeared to be the sports section and was following a local basketball tournament with mild interest. This is impossible, the Emperor said, his voice much quieter than before. No single ship can defeat 10,000 vessels. Well, Chen said without looking up, they weren't really defeated. Nobody got hurt. No ships were destroyed. And everyone will be going home soon. It's more like they've been temporarily suspended. She turned a page and chuckled at something. Oh, look at that. The Luna City Comets won the championship. Good for them. I had money on that game. The absurdity of the situation was lost on no one. While the largest military force in galactic history sat frozen in space, humanity's representative was reading about sports scores. Emperor Zixtal tried to summon his old commanding presence. What are your terms? Chen folded her newspaper neatly and set it aside. She stood up and walked to the center of the chamber. Her hands clasped behind her back. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly to every corner of the vast hall. Our terms are simple, she began. The hegemony empire will be dissolved immediately. All member species will be granted immediate independence and the right to govern themselves as they see fit. A murmur went through the crowd. Many of the smaller species had been imperial subjects for centuries. The idea of sudden freedom was both thrilling and terrifying. All imperial military forces will return to their home systems and will not be used for conquest or expansion. Chen continued. The galaxy has had quite enough war for 1 millennium. Emperor Zixtal's crystal body flickered weakly. And what of the imperial government? What of me? Chen consulted tomorrow's newspaper. According to this, you're planning to retire to a monastery on Serenity Prime. Apparently, you'll spend your remaining years in peaceful meditation and writing poetry. The article mentions that your poems about crystal formations and light refraction will become quite popular in certain literary circles. The emperor stared at her. I write poetry? Apparently you're quite good at it, Chen said with a smile. Who would have thought? Hidden talents often emerge when people stop worrying about conquering things. She turned to address the entire assembly. A new galactic council will be established, with representation from all species. Decisions will be made by consensus rather than force. The council's primary purpose will be to facilitate cooperation, trade, and cultural exchange. The representative from the Altarian Confederacy raised a tentacle. Who will enforce these new arrangements? What prevents another empire from rising to fill the power vacuum? Chen's expression became serious for the first time. That's an excellent question. The answer is that humanity will provide oversight. Not rule. Not control. Just oversight. We'll maintain a small peacekeeping force equipped with temporal technology. Any attempt to recreate the old empire or start new wars will be met with the same response your fleet just experienced. She gestured toward the direction of the Sol system. Think of it as a cosmic timeout system. Aggressive species get put in slow time until they're ready to behave peacefully. The Forge-born representative spoke up in their mechanical voice. This represents an unprecedented shift in galactic power structures. How do we know humanity will not abuse this authority? The lows, unprecedented generated presented. Chen nodded approvingly. Another good question. The answer is in our newspapers. She held up both papers. Look at what humans do when we have unlimited time and resources. We grow pumpkins, we play sports, we write music and create art, and explore the universe out of curiosity rather than greed. She walked closer to the Forge-born section. Your people understand efficiency and logic. Tell me, what's more logical? Spending enormous resources on weapons and war, or using those same resources to solve scientific problems and improve everyone's quality of life? The mechanical being's optical sensors flickered as it processed this. The latter would be more efficient, but organic species rarely choose efficiency over dominance. Exactly, Chen agreed. But when you can manipulate time, dominance becomes irrelevant. Why spend centuries conquering the galaxy when you can spend that same time in accelerated research labs, discovering new forms of art, music, and poetry that your species never imagined? She returned to the center of the chamber. Humanity doesn't want to rule the galaxy. We want to study it. We want to learn from every species, share what we've discovered, and see what wonders we can create together. Emperor Zixtal found his voice again. And if we refuse these terms? Chen shrugged. Then your fleet stays in slow time. Admiral Kethmore and his crews will have about 60 subjective years to think it over. They'll age normally, of course, but the universe around them will seem to move very, very slowly. Eventually, they'll get bored enough to want to come home. She smiled. Though, according to tomorrow's paper, Admiral Kethmore surrenders in about 15 minutes. Apparently, he's a practical man who cares more about his crews than his pride. As if summoned by her words, a communication signal reached the council chamber. Emperor Zixtal activated the receiver, and Admiral Kethmore's voice filled the hall. The transmission was distorted by the temporal effects, making his words sound stretched and strange, but the message was clear. Emperor, I formally request permission to surrender unconditionally. Crews are safe, but we cannot continue this engagement. Recommend immediate acceptance of human terms. The silence that followed was profound. The greatest military mind in Imperial history, commanding the largest fleet ever assembled, was admitting defeat to a single human ship. Emperor Zixtal's crystal form dimmed to barely visible levels. I accept your terms. Chen nodded and made a note in a small notebook she produced from her pocket. Excellent. Captain Rodriguez will release the temporal field within the hour. All Imperial ships should return to their home systems immediately. She looked around the chamber at all the assembled species. I know this is a big change for everyone, but I think you'll find that peace is much more interesting than war. When you're not spending all your time and resources on fighting, you'd be amazed at what becomes possible. The Zalani representative, speaking through sent translation devices, asked, What happens now? How do we proceed with this new order? Chen checked her watch. Well, according to my schedule, I have a lunch appointment back on Earth in about 2 hours. There's a small cafe near the university that makes excellent sandwiches. After that, I was planning to attend a lecture on quantum crystallography. She gathered up her newspapers and put them in her briefcase. I suggest you all go home and talk to your people about what kind of future they want to build. The new council will convene next month. Until then, try not to start any wars. It's really quite unnecessary. As she prepared to leave, Emperor Zixtal called out one last time. Human. Why? Why show mercy to those who threatened you with extinction? Chen paused at the edge of the chamber and looked back. Because, Your Former Majesty, when you have infinite time to consider problems, you eventually realize that the most interesting question in the universe isn't, how do we defeat our enemies? It's, how do we turn our enemies into friends? She smiled. Besides, according to next week's paper, your poetry really is quite good. I'm looking forward to reading it. With that, Ambassador Chen walked out of the council chamber, leaving behind an empire that no longer existed, and a galaxy that was about to discover what peace could accomplish. Outside the chamber, she checked her watch again and quickened her pace. She really did have a lunch appointment, and the cafe's turkey sandwiches were worth being on time for. After all, when you could manipulate time itself, punctuality became both easier and more important. The galaxy would have to learn to govern itself peacefully. But judging by tomorrow's newspapers, they would do just fine. Humanity would be there to help if needed. But mostly they would be busy with more important things, like growing championship pumpkins and writing beautiful poetry about the light of distant stars.